All right, so we're going to start on the next project today. It's going to be a mech, like I mentioned before. So it should have things like gears and pulleys, or something that's mechanical. Obviously, you can utilize Google to find stuff. Mechanical items. Okay, so these are kind of cool parts. The idea with a lot of these is that if you're working in the automotive industry, you may be modeling these pieces, you may be animating these pieces, you may be texturing or whatever. You at least need to understand the basics of them. Sometimes you'll work with just a simple piece like this. Like you might render out a cool image of that. You might animate a cool image of that. It all depends. So we're going to go through and try to understand a lot of different techniques. So on here is just some sketches that I did inside of Photoshop based on some of the imagery that I found on Pinterest and Google, different stuff that I thought might look cool. There's a lot of these things where you'll see like these tiny like orb things and then like these huge legs. This one here I thought might be cool, like a tiny orb and huge legs, but it just looks like a crotch. So I'm not going to go with that one at all. And then, something like that too. So that's why they never do the one like that. So on makeatmacomb.com, I put up a new video. It's Polygon Tools, okay? So that way I don't have to go through this and talk about every single Polygon tool that I use. Go through that video, you can see, like, here's the tools that you should be using when you model stuff. So far we've used Bevel, Extrude, and Insert Edge Loop. Someone's saying it. Those are the three basic ones for creating a lot of surfaces. But now that we're getting into other stuff, it's going to become more complex as we go. I'm going to quickly just type this in over here and see. So you can go onto that website and then find out all those tools. I'm going to open up my image. Whoops. So I'm going to set my project, mechanical, go to open, number 2. Loading. There we go. And new camera. There he is. Okay. So there's my mech that I created. This is not done just with those 3 basic tools. It can't be. There's so much stuff going on. Okay. So things like this, where I have these little panels here, things like this, you'll see that if I zoom in close, I have these little hinges like right there. If I can click on it. There. Okay. So a lot of these are using, again, another set of tools that we'll go through. Typically when you model stuff, you're going to have to do a number of things. Deleting faces, adding faces, separating, combining, blah, 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 all that stuff. Yes, sir?
Those screens you had on there, are those separate objects or are they from the objects surrounding it?
These are separate objects, but I created this as one shape and then extracted those pieces off to create these. So that way they'll blend nicely. Because if I had some crazy shape like this, it'd be very difficult for me to model that and get it to feel like it's flowing with the rest of it. Okay? And the same thing for these things up here. This was all originally one shape that I then broke off into pieces so that I could eventually have these things animating if I wanted. Okay? Now this is going to kick up our skill level a bit more because we're using the same stuff, but we're obviously adding a lot more stuff to our tool bag. But we also have to be worried about things like, how would things actually move? So this is a hydraulic. I have it set up here and there. So as I'm building this, I'm considering how would this thing physically be able to move on this hydraulic thing. So it'd have to be mounted here, it would have to be mounted there, and then this stick that's inside of it would have to be long enough that it could extend the arm out a distance and then collapse. Okay? Now there is a limitation. If this is his arm, it could only go so far before this piece here would hit that. So there is a limitation to that mech. Okay? Now I'm not expecting yours to be as complex as this. You can go very simple. You can create a very basic box and have gears and widgets and whatever else kind of controlling it. But I just want to show this. I also have, this is his iris, created the same way. So I started off with a sphere and built this iris the same way that I did those panels on top by extracting faces and using that as my starter point. I also have a lens in here. And if I select this correctly and I just isolate this, then I can grab these faces and rotate, and then I could actually animate that, okay? So as I'm building stuff, I'm also considering how I would animate it, and that is kind of how I'm building things as I go. This is, oops, Photoshop, open. So I'm going to show what the end result would look like. Mechanical images. Close that. Oh, that's it, yeah. All right, so this is my high-res version. This one is 7,000 by 4,000, okay? Our end result will be 1920 by 1080. I'll go over the sheet next class. But I rendered it that high so that I could really get in here and see that detail. If I rendered this at a smaller size, and I can just resize this so we can see what it's going to look like. You'll see that that lens looks really fuzzy now, where a second ago it looked like it was pretty crisp. Okay, so this is what I talked about before about when you find something like this is working, I like the way this is turning out, I'm going to make a high-res render. There's my high-res render. Now just so you can see this, let me cancel that. Cancel. All right, I'm not going to cancel that apparently. I meant to open that nuke. This is where we're going to start introducing more nuke into it. So before I said we're going to eventually use nuke. You can use it on the first assignment. This assignment will be much more heavily utilizing nuke. And I have to connect to my other server because for whatever reason it doesn't want me to connect to the colleges. All right, so this is that it? No. That's it there. So that's the original render. And then here is the one with the adjustments. And again, you can kind of go through and see what things have changed from one to the other. This highlight is a lot brighter in the finished one. This lens around here has a bit more of a blue. There's a lot more depth because I'm using my AO to join those together. Obviously the background, I have a bit more, I have a gradient in the back as opposed to just like flat, okay? Let's try opening that again. There it goes. So this one obviously is a bit more complex, right? So there's a lot more stuff going on. You may not use all of this. You may not use a quarter of this, but you will use more than you did on the previous assignment, okay? And the idea with this is that we want to understand how do we control different pieces of this. If I want that light that's going around the center of him, I probably closed it, no I didn't. If I want this light that's going around here to be a different color, or I want that to glow, or I want whatever, I need to be able to add that in at some point. I need to figure out how to add that in. So we'll go through that as well. You can see how slow this is going. This is my 7,000 pixel, I believe. If I hit save, yes, 7,000 pixel. I'm going to load in my small one. And then I'm going to set my settings for my small one. There it goes. And now I can work a lot quicker. There's an advantage too. As I'm working with a smaller version of this inside of Nuke, it goes super quick. Just loading it, you saw a second ago how slow that was going. So even sometimes I'll render stuff out at half resolution just so I can do all the Nuke stuff, and then I can render out my high res when I'm ready. Now I'll show you that too. If I go to my D drive, this. No, where's my folder at? Okay, should be here somewhere. Oh, I think I put it in the new folder. Sick plan, nope. Don't pull up everything. I don't know what to do with that. Anyway, what I was going to mention, the render speeds on these. So the P drive, Vol, 520, Mac, images, just to make sure it's not inside this master layer again. No, it's not. I don't know what happened to it. There we go. So the large size, which is this one, you'll see the huge file increase. It's a half a gig for that one file because it's 7,000 pixels. That took 440 minutes to render out. Any guesses on how long that is? What was that? 7 hours, right? So 7 hours for that high-res image. But if I have an awesome image and I want to blow it up to a poster size, there we go, right? Again, something cool about 3D, you can make something super small and work on it super small. Then you need it bigger, you hit a bigger size, and now you have this huge image. The medium took about 200 minutes. And the small only took like, I think, an hour or so to render out, okay? So even at the small size, it's still going to take a considerable amount of time, but we get that detail. You know, you don't get that any other way. So this is what the end result looked like. So you can see, like, this is the rendered out from Maya. And then these are all the different layers that I rendered out from Maya to give me what I have. So you'll see here's the RGBA, here's the depth channel, here's ambient occlusion. We'll get into what these crypto objects are. Here's an opacity. Here's a shadow. I don't know why I have it at second AO. I'm not sure what happened there. Here's a coat, which is like the shininess right here. Here's another crypto, which we'll get into, and then diffuse, specular, indirect, emission, and direct. So I'm showing you the end product of this because as we work towards this, we're starting off here with that goal in mind, that we want to have details in there, and we want to be able to do render passes, and we want to create something very cool, right? So let's get into how we would start this project. So first thing we do in every project is make a new folder. So I make a new project. I call it Sarcona _ whatever. Make sure it goes in the right folder, and accept. Okay. So I just made my project, ready to go. I start off just kind of roughing in things, okay? With something like this, I really want to get a feel for how this shape is going to come together. So let me jump to Photoshop. Let me pull up one of my other illustrations. And let's go with this guy, okay? So here I have, it's kind of like a Pokeball with a lens in the middle, and it has these like wings that have hinges on it. So I'm just going to drop in some shapes. And I'm not going to spend too much time going through the details about specific tools because, again, I have a video that goes over all the tools in a lot more detail than I'm going to cover here. Today we're just focusing on the process of it, okay? My grid is right there, Okay, so that's my ground. I always model with like my ground in mind. So as I'm looking at this, you can see he's pretty high up off the ground. So I'm going to raise him up pretty high up off the ground. And then I'm going to drop in a couple shapes. So I'm going to drop in a cube. And I'm going to just go to, come on, vertex. And I'm just kind of giving this some basic shape. I will change things later. I will modify stuff. Right now I'm looking at just trying to get an idea of where these things should go. So there's one shape. I'm not even caring. I'm just duplicating it. And then I'm just turning on the vertices for this. And I think I'm actually going to put in like a third claw, like maybe down here. That'll kind of come in like that. That might be kind of cool. Okay. So that looks all right. This probably comes up like that maybe. Okay, so this is again just kind of like if you were in figure class, the first 15 minutes of figure class, you just do rough sketches, like 1 minute poses, and you're just trying to get the gesture of what it's doing. That's all I'm doing here. I'm just trying to get what are the proportions of these things. How big is this thing compared to the rest of it, right? If I really want to exaggerate it, make it like that, that actually looks better. I'll do that. I also don't move stuff away from the center. That's main. So this is my item. That stays right in the middle of my grid. That is the center of my world as far as I'm concerned. And the reason for that, I need these things to be on the other side. Watch how I can group. Control G. If you watched the hotkey video, you'd know that. Control D, another hotkey. And then I'll go to the scale X and make this a -1. And it pops it onto the other side. Okay? So a lot of times, very quickly, because everything is kind of on that side, we delete that. I'll just go Control G, Control D, -1, and there it goes. Okay? As you get quicker at this, it'll just come to you. So that's kind of cool like that. That's kind of neat. And then there will be some sort of, it looks like I have some hinges or some hydraulics here. So maybe I would have, you know, if there's a hydraulic here, how would that really function? So maybe this needs to come up some more. That might make more sense. You know, what would it look like that versus like this? Yeah, I think the middle is actually really good. All right, cool. So that's my starting point, okay? So now I have an idea. I'm just going to take these ones, and I'm going to drop these onto a layer, and I'm just going to template this. Okay, so that first button is template. That way I can still see them. I get an idea where they're at, but I'm not going to use them for anything except for placement. So you can see that better. I'm going to use Alt-B, and that's going to change my background color so it's easier for you to see my stuff. It's not a required step. All right, so let me go and customize what he looks like. So this is kind of like I said, a lens, right? So there's got to be an opening here. Always think about details. Think about big details, think about tiny details, okay? So something like an airplane, you have an airplane, you have the wings, you have the propellers on it, or they don't call them propellers, thrusters, whatever. But then you also have like the door, that's a medium piece of detail. Then you have like the line work that would go around, and you have little screws that are there. That's all the minor detail. As you add more levels, you're giving the illusion that this thing is bigger or smaller. So something that's very small and only has basically the same size details on it, it's going to feel very small. Something that's huge and it has very big details and nothing else is still going to feel small because everything's the same size. You have to have a relationship between big details, medium, and small. Okay. So I'm going to rotate this like so. Again, I'm using my snapping tools to rotate so that it snaps in increments. I'm going to keep this relatively low res, so I'm going to do like, I don't know, 8 divisions? No. Let's do lucky number 10. There we go. That's good. Nope, I don't like that. Sorry. I want this line right down the middle, and this line right down the middle. If I decide to quarter this, I want to make sure that I have a quarter right there. So now I'm going to go to faces, and this isn't in the hotkey video, but this is a super awesome hotkey. If you hold tab, this allows you to just like select stuff like that. So I just hold tab and then click and drag, and it lets me select.
Does it have problems where it picks up any faces like on the other side of the object?
It doesn't. It's amazing, isn't it? So one of my students showed that to me. I don't know how they figured it out, but I'm like, this is awesome. I want to use that, and I'm kind of looking like, is that where I want the lens to be, or do I want that to be bigger? Because right now, that's what I'm setting. I'm setting in like, this is where the lens is going to be coming out of. I'm going to go one more big, so I'm going to use Shift greater than to grow that selection. If I wanted it somewhere in between these two, insert edge loop, and now I have an extra edge loop that I could then use. So now I'm going to extrude and just give this a little bit of an offset, so like, I don't know, that much. My numbers are relative, so the bigger I scale this, the less of a difference the smaller numbers make, okay? If this is super small, 0.05 is going to seem huge. So actually, yeah, I think that was good, 0.05. And then I'm going to extrude again. And I'm just going to notch this in a little bit. And then now what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull it off that surface. So I'm going to use my extract, separate, extract. So now when I go to object mode, I have two different surfaces, okay? So now I have the cap. A lot of times as I model stuff, you'll see me do this where I click on the item and then I click that button to isolate. Because what I want to do is I want to just focus in on that. I'm ignoring everything else. The placement is there. I just want to focus in on what this thing is doing. So now I'm going to go crazy with details. So this is a sphere. It's not going to be a whole lot of details, grooves and whatever else like that. So I'm going to smooth it. So I actually get like a smoothed out version, a lot more rims here. And then I'm going to go to my faces, and I'm going to grab this one, that one. And notice how I clicked here, held shift, and then double click the next one. It loops it around, okay? And I'm going to extrude that out. By doing something like this, think of this. I have my sphere, I have a piece of glass, and it covers it. If I do an extrude like that, it's going to feel like the glass has some sort of trim going around it, holding it in place, okay? That's the whole purpose of what I just did there. I think I'm also going to switch to my move tool and maybe just push that forward a little bit and maybe just scale it down a little bit. There we go. So that might look kind of neat. As you're modeling, just experiment with stuff. I'm going to grab this edge, and I think I want to just scale that edge out a smidge. And grab this edge and scale that edge out a smidge. All right, so we'll see what happens with that. Now I'm going to go to this edge, and I'm going to put in a bevel, drop it down, add some segments, and then I'm going to just put in a little cut line here. So I'm going to extrude, and this is super tiny. We're going to be zoomed out. We're going to see the legs, this thing. This is going to be such a minor detail. If it's not there, though, it'll be obvious that this thing is fake. I'm going to lower my offset to a really low number, 0.005. Nope, 0.008. See how tiny that is. If I'm back here, you can't even see that, right? And I'm going to be further away. I'm going to extrude that again, and I'm going to push that down ever so slightly. Extrude again, push that down ever so slightly. Oops, I missed. There we go. And then I'm going to go to my edges, and I'm going to double click that one. I'm going to go to wireframe. Sometimes you have to select things in wireframe. I don't know where I went. Go back to shaded mode because I lost it. There we go. Double click that. Shift double click that. And shift double click that. Okay, so super tiny. I'm going to add a little bevel to that. And 2 segments. Back to object mode. There we go. Okay, now you can barely see it. You can kind of see this little flickering. What you need to think about when you're modeling stuff are light and shadows. Okay, same thing when you're like sculpting or drawing. You're worried about light and shadows, and that's what's going to help these surfaces read. So that line is going to be a nice shadow line. We should have a nice little like lip or line that's going to run around this. The bevel is going to pick up a little bit of light, so now we have the light hitting that, okay? So that should be kind of cool like there. I think I want to maybe extrude this a little bit more, so I'm just going to extrude that and push that out some, just to give that a little bit more detail. And then bevels all around. Everyone gets a bevel. Here looks like it's pretty tight. I shouldn't need a bevel there. 0.2 and 2 segments and object mode and 3. So that looks pretty detailed. Okay. Let's say he has a little power port on the back. We're not going to see the back, but maybe I'll do a 360 at some point, right? Or a 180 or something. So I'm going to go here. I'm going to grab those faces, again with that really cool selection tool. I'm going to extrude. I'm going to take this down to maybe let me hit 1 first. There you go. 0.5. Nope, that's going way too far down. 0.25. I'm going to go to scale and just scale this down. There we go. That's better. And then I'm going to extrude again. And push that in. Extrude again. I'm going to switch to my regular scale and just adjust some of this manually. And you'll see me do that a lot. Sometimes I just want to move it straight or left or right or whatever. Extrude again. Push this out. Extrude again. Scale it down. Extrude again. Oops. And notice every time I scale every time I scale, I'm grabbing that center. I'm never grabbing just the one direction because you're never going to be able to do this and do that and get it 100% every time. This is like 1,000 times easier. There we go. So that's like his power port. So that's where he charges. And now I'm going to go to my bevels and just add a bunch of bevels. Part of your modeling career is understanding that you will make mistakes, and then how do I correct them? Sometimes it's going to be easy. You just undo. Most of the time it won't be because you won't realize it. As I was modeling the other thing, number 1, it crashed, and I ended up redoing parts of it. But number 3, it it created like random stuff. Like I didn't think I did. I accidentally grabbed some random faces and started extruding. Initially it looked cool, but then it crashed again. I had to redo that. Just part of the fun. Part of the fun. Right. Also consider surfaces that are hard should be hard. Surfaces that are soft should be soft. So this looks like a hard surface, so I want this to look like it's a hard surface. All right, that's good. Turn that off. Okay, so now I can work on the lens. I'm going to hit 3, and that's done. Maybe I'll scale it up a smidge so it fills in there. There we go. Okay, so that already looks a lot better than it did before, right? Just a sphere cut out, kind of boring. Now it looks kind of cool. I could add little doodads and gadgets to the top of this too if I decided like, hey, it would be kind of cool if we had like a mohawk type thing. I could just add a separate part that's just right there, okay? Let's pretend that we wanted to do that. So I'm going to go to a cylinder because that's mohawk shaped when I rotate it. And I'm going to shrink ink this in and then make this bigger. And then nudge that down there. It's a tough robot now. There we go. Of course. Let's see, do I want that? Let me just delete some stuff here. So I'm deleting these faces. I don't want those. I don't want these. Don't want that. Then I'm going to grab this edge, shift double click that edge, and then do the same thing on the other side, this. Oh no, that's not going to work at all. Let's do something different here. So I'm going to grab this, I'm going to hit B. B is soft select. Usually you'll hit it on accident, like everyone does. If I hold B and middle drag, it changes the diameter of that soft select. So I'm going to make this a little bit wider. I'm not going to touch the very tips of these. And I'm just going to go to my scale, like that. So you stylish and angry, I guess. Now we can grab this and extrude, and I'm going to switch to my scale tool and just bring this in and then push that down. Sweet. Now we'll bevel it up. There. Bevels. I kind of like it like that, actually, with the 2 on the side. That's kind of neat. Still going to bevel it, but I'm just going to go back and bevel these now. So tighten this up, less segments, or more segments, and then hit 3, and whew, look at that. That's fancy. I think these need to come in, though. This looks a little bit too, like, rounded here. So I'm just going to scale these together there, grab these 2, and these 2, scale that together. All right, that's good enough. Cool. So very easily I can add that. I'll have to fix that. It looks like a ravioli or something. All right, we'll fix that later. All right, so that's good there. I'm going to hide this. So usually I'll have a hiding layer, stuff that I just need to get rid of. I want to see the rest of the scene, but I don't want to see that. So I'm just going to double click that, call this hiding. Turn that off. Probably a good time to save my scene too. I would recommend also saving iterations. So if you save your stuff, it crashes, you can go back, and if it corrupted your file, you at least have something else to go back to. The inside of this is completely dark. I'm going to go to lighting and say two-sided. Now I can see the inside of it. Okay. Now, if I have this cylinder here, or this sphere here, I have a lens on it which is transparent, look at what it's going to see on the inside. It's going to see the mohawk there, it's going to see this. So even though we don't want, even though we have a lens on it and whatever, I still want to build the insides of it. So I'm going to go in here to the edges, and I'm going to try to find the very edge. It looks like it's right there. That looks like it, yes. So I'm going to extrude this very edge, switch to my move tool, and hit 1 so I can not see it smoothed out. There we go. And scale it down, extrude again, scale it down. I'll have to fix that mohawk. And then I'm going to go to fill hole. Actually, I don't want fill hole. I want merge. There we go. All right, so now I need to take the mohawk here, and I need to adjust it so it's not sticking in there. And I can be kind of crude about this because you don't see it. So that didn't change anything on the outside. All it does is hide it from the inside. Okay. Even when I smooth it, we still don't see it. Good. I'm going to grab these faces here, extrude again, shrink it down, extrude again, push it down. And you'll see I'm just doing like random extrusions. There's no like rhyme or reason to why I'm doing the kind of stuff I'm doing. I just know that these are going to create some cool shapes. When I render it out, you'll see detail. And then, as always, bevel it up. Bevel. Whoops. Make sure your fingers are on the right spot. There we go. Cool. All right. So now I need to create the iris that's going to rotate. I don't need to if I'm not going to see inside it. I didn't want to, whatever. But in this case, I'm going to show how I would build it. Always look for reference when you need it. So if you've ever seen like a camera iris, this is essentially what they look like, you know, like that. Here's another example of one. This one is like just these like long arms, you know, going in there. They still work. The idea is that it's opening and closing, and they do that by rotating. So if we go to this, that's it closing, and then as it opens, there it is, okay? So we have to start with some kind of shape. If you look up different shapes, you'll see there actually is like there's a bunch of different shapes out there. So I'm going to create a cube, I'm going to isolate it, and then I'm going to build this, set it up, and then slide it into position when I'm ready. Okay? I need the grid for this. So I'm going to pull this away from the grid, and I'm just going to draw it or modify it like I think it should be. So I'm just grabbing points, and I'm just going to do a very basic shape. Insert edge loops right here, right there, right there. And then grabbing stuff and just kind of pushing it in. Okay? And the way this works is just, you can really use any kind of these flat shapes. And typically this is going to work. All we do is we need to make it so it can open and make it so it can close. That's all we have to do. So something like that, even though it looks weird, it'll still work. I am going to maybe round this a little bit. Maybe just push that in. Push that in. All right. There we go. So this is the center right here where these two lines come together. This is my iris. If I were to rotate this, that's how it's going to rotate in. So I want to make sure that as it rotates, that it can touch the center point. If this is way back here and I rotate it, I could have a million of these. There's no way they're going to close. Okay, so I'm actually going to nudge this maybe a little bit closer. And now this has plenty of room to hit that center point as it's rotating. This is the magic part of it. I'm going to make sure that pivot number 1 is back here. So I'm going to hit D, move my pivot to where it's going to be rotating from. There's no specific spot. It's just like back here looks good. If it's way up here, this is not a good spot. It should be back here by this side. Okay. Then I'm going to group it. So you can watch in the outliner, group. It puts the pivot there. That's why I grouped it. Because now I can duplicate it, rotate it, and I know that I'm going to have how many degrees around is this thing going to go? 360, right? So if I use 7.329, does that evenly go into 360? Probably not. So I need to find some number that will evenly go into 360 without giving me some crazy values. So if you don't want to do math on it, 15, 10, those are typically good numbers. 20 would also go. The smaller this number is, the more of these iris blades I'm going to get. Okay? So if I went to 60, that would give me less iris blades, but it would still work. Or it should still work as long as I have a smaller opening. This looks like it's too much of a gap. So 15 looked like a good number. 20 might even work too. I mean, I'll go with 20. Now I'm going to hit Shift D. What does Shift D do? Yep. It duplicates it and offsets it. So whatever I've just done, it does it again, right? It is a saw blade. So I'm going to delete these again and show you what typically happens when you do this. So I'm going to grab the group, I'm going to duplicate, I'm going to rotate it, I'm going to type this in, and I'm going to hit Shift D. Okay, pretend I hit it. This is what usually happens. Nothing. Okay? Sometimes when you're using this tool, it just doesn't work. Okay? It just, for whatever reason, Maya doesn't like it. So I will delete it, I will re-grab the group, I will reduplicate it, I will retype in my 20 degrees, and then I will hit Shift D again a bunch of times until it goes all the way around. Okay? Now, you'll see that there is a tiny circle in there. That's no big deal because I have a little bit of a gap that I can use. Now, I'm going to select all of these. I'm not selecting the group because the groups are what put it right where it's at. I'm going to select them individually. Then, as I rotate this, see how amazing that is? Cool. Now, I do need to offset them a little bit or rotate it a little bit. Right now, they're all flat on top of each other. If I were to try to render this, we may have seen this in the last assignment, you will actually get like black and white stuff where basically the two surfaces are competing over which one gets to be shown. Okay? So I'm just going to rotate it slightly like that, and now I won't get that. And this still works. So like that's perfectly there. Cool. So now I need to get this into position. So I'm going to grab all my groups. I'm going to group my groups. I'm going to call this iris. And then I'm going to go unhide that. Now I can move this into position. Now if you don't do that right, it doesn't work. once it's in position, there's not really a fix for it. You just have to redo it. And then I can decide where I want this to be. It should be centered, so I'm going to switch to my front view. Go to wireframe, hold down V, and drag this blue arrow up. That'll snap it vertically. That's perfectly centered. Okay. Again, another reason why I keep everything right at that origin, right on that grid line. It makes your life a lot easier. If my robot was way over here, I would have to try to move it, center it, rotate it, whatever else to get it lined up. So I like where that's positioned there. I think that's going to be a good spot. There. Okay. Now I need to reshape this a little bit so that it feels like there's a perimeter around this. So that's too big. I'm going to insert an edge loop. Let's put one right there, there, there. At this stage, we're not worried about poly count. We're not worried about how many divisions we have. So you can go pretty much crazy on this with divisions. It's just going to take longer to render. Eventually, we'll be more worried about it. That was pretty good. Pretty good. I'm going to grab these. I'm going to scale it down some. There we go. And then bevel it again. There we go. Cool. And then if I unhide my layer here, there's my glass. Okay. Now I do have to do one more thing to my glass. Any glass surfaces should never be hollow. Okay. This is basically one side of it. There's no thickness to the glass. When we have a light and the light's hitting the glass, we should actually see like a reflection on each side of this thing. Okay. So I'm going to extrude it. I'm going to give it a little bit of an offset. And then I'm going to bevel these edges. Okay, so give it a little bit of thickness, offset it, and then beveled it. Now when I hit 3, I have this nice little like contact lens for my robot. Cool. I'm going to put in a cable here. That might be kind of cool. Let's put in a cable. So I didn't have that on mine, so I'm going to use a different tool. So I'm going to go to my curve tools, and I'm going to use the CV curve. Now what this tool allows me to do is just like Illustrator, I can draw out a curve. Okay, Cinema has it also. So I'm going to click a point right here. I'm going to hold down Shift and click. You'll see it go straight. And then I'm going to just let go of Shift and just kind of click what I want this to look like. Okay. Now it might take some getting used to because this isn't like handlebars and that. You just kind of like click and the curve will kind of follow it. So I know where my ground is. It's this darker line. So I'm kind of making it look like, this is on the ground. There we go. I hit enter, switch back to perspective view. There's my cable. Okay, now this isn't geometry. This is just a curve. I'm going to go to Control Vertex. I'm going to grab these. I'm going to hit B to get to my soft select. Make this a bit bigger and just adjust this. So I just want this to not be perfectly straight because that's not really realistic. There we go. So that feels a little bit better than it did a second ago. Okay. So now I need to give this a shape. So I'm going to go to my Create NURBS circle. And this is what it creates as a NURBS circle. So think of, let me delete this cube here. Think of Cinema. So we had a tool that would allow us to extrude. We would draw a path out and we could extrude and create a surface. That's what this is going to do, except it's going to take that circle and it's going to extrude it along that curve. Okay. So circle, shift click that, and then under the surfaces menu, I'm going to go to this extrude. This is a different extrude than we've used before. The options are pretty straightforward. These 4 right here will do what we need it to do. I'm also going to convert this into polygons. So it'll allow me to make it a NURB surface, which is a different kind of surface. We want it as a polygon. Quads, general, per span. Okay? So every time I use this tool, all 4 of these are selected. Polygons, quads, general, per span here, per span there, and extrude. And there it is. Crazy big. But I can grab this circle here, go to scale, and just scale it down. There you go. So that looks kind of cool there. I'm just floating right now. Cool. All right, so these wings here are going to be attached somehow, right on the edges. So I have to debate how I want to do that. Do I want a hinge joint? Do I want a ball joint? I have to have something there. If there's just like metal sticking out of it, I could do that. Like I could just have these just like sticking straight out of this. But then there's no flexibility here. He can't move any of those pieces. Okay, it's just like solid metal here and solid metal there. If I'm going to do like a ball joint, I can just create a sphere. And just go and scale that up. Okay, now obviously this will come into play as to how I'm animating this stuff, as to how that can move. You have to consider, if I was to animate this, how do I want it to move? Fur and joints. I didn't get any marijuana. I thought I would get at least one. All right, so here's the different kinds of joints. So we have a pivot joint, which is like this. We have ball and socket. We have a hinge joint, gliding plane, saddle, and whatever. Typically, like your shoulder is more of like a ball and socket. You can move it in 3 different directions. So I can rotate my shoulder like this, I can go this way, or I can go up and down with that, okay? My elbow, what kind of joint is that? Hinge, yeah, that's it. That's the only way we can move our elbow, okay? Even though we're doing this, we're not moving the elbow at all. That's a totally separate thing. That's all we're doing is a hinge joint, right? So as we model this robot, we have to consider, how do I want to move the pieces? On this thing here, I may want that shoulder part of him to be able to rotate forward, or I may want him to be able to move it up and down, okay? So I'm going to do the ball joint here, so I'm going to keep that there. I didn't model anything right out of this. I just kind of stuck something there. Now to make it feel like it's, you know, a little bit more custom, I'm going to kind of rotate this, and I'm looking at this line, and I'm trying to get it kind of like the line is around it, like that. And then I'm going to switch to this side and kind of rotate it a little bit this way, a little bit up. There we go. So now it feels like maybe a little bit, you know, down here, this way. Whoop. Uh-oh. Oh, my hand, stupid laptop. That looks pretty good. Okay. So now I'm going to go to my faces here, turn my soft select off. And I'm going to grab, oops, let me duplicate this first, because I'm going to need that later. I'm going to freeze transform so all the translates and rotates go back to 0. And then I'm just going to move it away. There we go. Now I'm going to go back to my faces. I'm going to go to extrude. And I'm going to extrude this and then kind of stick that right there. So even though this isn't modeled out of the same piece, the fact that I did that makes it feel like it's actually off that same surface, okay? So I need to have those kinds of things there so that it looks better. I don't need any of this stuff in here. That stuff can go bye-bye, so I'm just going to select it and delete. Grab this. Very similar to what I did on the other piece. I'm just going to start moving or extruding it and moving pieces in like that. And then drop in some bevels. Oops, that one's the end. That's not going to do anything. There we go. All right, so that's cool. Now this is why I froze transform this before I did anything, because now I can just go here and reset. Pops it right back in. And then I can just scale it down. And that works pretty good. Okay? Now, this still gives me a little bit of limitation as to how far this can move. This is a hemisphere. If something is connected here, it can only move like a certain amount this way and a certain amount that way, but definitely a lot more than I had before, okay, with just a hinge joint. So now I'm going to build this one piece, and then I'm going to let you guys start building stuff. Create cube. Most of my shapes I build off of cubes. So this has to attach to that sphere. That's the only way this works, right? I can't attach up here. It's there. And there. The bigger I make that, the less movement I'm going to have on it. Okay? Now, even though this has changed the shape a little bit, I may, you know, modify my original design somewhat because of how I'm kind of seeing this come to life. As I'm seeing it being built, I want that stuff to be there. Okay? Let's go here and just adjust this. Now, eventually, this might be like rotated some. I build everything flat, square to the grids as much as you can. If you start getting into this kind of stuff, where you're rotating things away from that grid line, it becomes very difficult to do anything like fancy. Okay? I do it like this. When I'm ready, then I rotate. All right, so if I were to take these pieces here and move this up to that, if this is a ball and socket joint, it can only move up that much. Like as this ball rotates, it can only go that far. Okay? Same thing on the bottom. It can only go this far before it breaks. So I'm going to take these pieces, I'm going to squish them in together. And I'm going to grab this and move it down. All right, that should give me plenty of room for him to move around that joint. I think I want this to come up a bit more like that. This is a bit more like that. Yeah, that might be good there. So we'll see. I can always adjust afterwards. Okay. And then let's add some detail to this. Inserting edge loops. And again, there's not really a whole rhyme or reason of where I'm putting them specifically. I just think like, hey, this might be kind of cool to just grab these faces here and then do a bridge. And now I have a cutout in the middle. Like that might be a cool thing to see. Oops. And my bridge options are still set from the video, so that's why I had that little line in the middle. Let's just reset that. There we go. Now if I smooth this, that's going to look pretty junky, and it's not really going to fit with my robot. Like that looks way too soft for the rest of them. So bevels, edge loops, whatever. I'm just going to grab this whole thing and bevel the whole thing. Whoops. There we go. So now the whole thing is beveled. There's a nice little highlight running along that. I may grab some cubes, sure. And I'm going to snap this. Again, if you watch the hockey video, you see all the snapping tools we have. And shrink this, shrink this. Maya does have a tool called Mash. I'm not going to use it for this, but it's basically like MoGraph. So if you were trying to duplicate a bunch of shapes, you could use Mash for it. I just use the, Shift D, sufficient for what I need. Okay, so that's going to stick past it. I'll just adjust that after. Front view. Let's make this actually huge, and I'll adjust. Duplicate, scoot that over. Nope. Undo. That was too far. Or not far enough. Feels good enough. All right. Now I can bring this up. Now I can scale it down. Now I can grab the vertices and just move them individually. That looks good. And you'll also notice me switching between like wireframe because it's easier to see where I'm at, and shaded mode. I'm also using like F to frame it so I can zoom right in. I'm going to turn my grid off because it's kind of annoying now. Can't see. And then the same thing here. I think you get the idea with the other ones, right? Now I don't want to grab the red because if I grab the red and move it, it's going to like change that shape. And that might look weird. whatever one part of the robot looks like, the rest of it should kind of conform to it. You'll never see like a robot with like one super crisp area and then one like super soft area. Typically you don't see that. All right, so now I'm going to go here. I'm going to use a selection mask at the top just so I can marquee all those edges and bevel all of them. And that didn't work for all of them. So I'm going to go hit undo. I'm going to bevel again, and I'll come over here into the channel box and say fraction, segments. Nope, that didn't work either. You suck. 0.22. And the only reason I'm not using mesh for this, it's a cool tool, but it just has some limitations to it that MoGraph doesn't have. Not limitations really, but just like, you know, workarounds. Like I can't just pick it up and move it. I think this might be cool too to kind of pull it up. I don't know if this is going to look good. I'm just trying it out. Like, what is that going to look like? Survey says no. Let's put that back where it was. Cool. All right, so I'll leave that. Okay. Now, as I build, oh, I messed that up. Whatever, I'll have to fix that. As I build this next piece, I would use a cylinder. And I'm just going to show you a quick hinge. Rotate. Okay, roughly there. And again, thinking about how big this hinge is going to help you be able to see it from afar. So you don't want it super tiny or super skinny, then you can't see it. I'm also thinking about how a hinge would attach to this. In this model, I have basically like a huge hinge. That would be like that, okay? And here I'm building this small hinge. So I may opt and try the other one, but right now I'm just using this. I'm going to add enough height segments here. And again, looking at reference. So here's a door hinge. You'll see that it has an odd number of segments. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Too many. Oops, 5. And I'm going to go to faces, and I'm just going to grab these faces and these faces. This works for 50 different ones. If you had 50 different ones. And then I'm going to go to extract. And then I'm just going to center pivot and shrink that down. Go to this one. Actually, I'm going to do these at the same time. Center pivot and shrink that down. And then I can extrude it and then just push it in some. Same thing here, I'll extrude and give this a little bit of thickness. That's way too much. Okay, then I could also put another cylinder right in the middle, and that would be like the pin. See this pin that's right there? That typically goes through the middle of that. And then I would have to create some sort of plane here that the hinge would connect to, and then a plane on the other side where that hinge would connect to. Okay. So use the primitives. There's plenty of stuff here you can start off with. There is a gear one, so if you didn't spend the time to look at that, there actually is like a gear right there. And you can do a whole bunch of stuff with this. If you're in the right mode, why isn't this selecting? Why are you still on that? I don't know. But you can change things like the number of sides, the radius, internal radius, the height divisions. Okay, so you can do a lot with this hinge. If you're going to use, let's say, this hinge in 15 different spots, do all your beveling ahead of time. Okay, you don't want to duplicate this 20 times and then realize you need bevels, because that would suck. So I would go through and bevel like everything on here. I'm not going to select all of the stuff, but all the way around this area here, down in these crevices, and so on. You can't just grab the whole thing, because then you'll grab these middle pieces and then it won't look good. Bevel edge, 0.2, oops, 2 segments, not 12. It's a good way to end the lecture, isn't it? Just crash my... Yep, it's thinking. So it's trying to add 12 there because I typed in 12 into each one of those. But if I put too many segments here, or I try to segment this area, I may actually get like faceting around the center of that thing, and it may not look good. So as you build your stuff, just think about all the different things that need to go in there. I couldn't have a hinge without having screws in there if it's going to be a more visible hinge. Mine, I didn't put any because they're so tiny inside there that I don't see them. If I'm going to do something like this, look at all the different shapes that go into making this shape work. I mean, really any of these, right? So you can see all the different shapes and pieces that go into making just as one piece look really awesome. Same thing here. You can see all the different stuff and how they're connected. Like, these can't be here unless there's a pin connecting those, right? Here's some more wires and more extrudes right there, little clips holding things on, random extrusions and, you know, in certain spots. Okay, so I'd recommend obviously having your sketch, Maya's still frozen, having your sketch kind of laid out as to what you want to do. Watch the Polygon video, and then when you're ready, just jump in and start working on stuff. You may scrap pieces, you may delete pieces, that's all part of the fun. But experiment, try stuff out. It doesn't work, throw it away. If you're not sure, duplicate a shape, try stuff, doesn't work, scrap it and go back to the original, okay? I do it all the time. It's just part of that process. Oh, it's not frozen. Now it's time to save. There we go. All right, so here it is. You know, these look pretty good. And then if you look at the inside of this, that looks pretty horrible. But if I have a cylinder in the middle, maybe it doesn't matter, right? Typically, you would have a cylinder in the middle. Cool. Questions on the stuff yet? No. Alrighty.